all of my cousins and many of my and folks in the community who I'm probably related to, whenever they talk about Arvetta, they always say, I can even imitate it. It's the same thing. When you really start laughing about something, you always put your, it's like you cover up your mouth so that you can't show your teeth. Oh, it's like that's when you know you're over the top in terms of humor. And she loved to smile and she loved to laugh. I mean, she loved to laugh, and she thought things were funny all the time. And yet she was incredibly serious. I mean, she was incredibly intent and focused. But when if she'd see something like a bug and you said something about it, she would like she'd cover up her mouth and just laugh. I I think that what that was for me was a small message that I've taken my entire life, which is don't take it too seriously. Don't take it too seriously. You know, stormy weather is going to come, and it's going to be followed by sunshine, which is going to be followed by stormy weather. And so we've learned to go with the times. And I think that this legacy of this land, we have, people have heard this probably from the country, in the country, their whole lives, about land. They ain't making anymore. And so for her, that was everything. And and as a result, one of the things that I always imagine is that when she married my grandfather, what came with it was that dirt up there. That is some of the richest dirt around. I'm not saying that she wasn't had didn't have she wasn't magical in a garden. She really was, but she also knew how to start it, and it started with incredibly rich soil. Because we have a garden up there, and it's full of okra and peas and watermelons and tomatoes, and we were eating them last night. We had everything right from the garden. In fact, we got a catfish pond, and we pulled out catfish and ate it with some tomatoes and potatoes that are also growing in the garden. And that's her garden. And I spent hours in that garden. And even to this day, we have pear trees around that we pull pears off of, and fruits and all kinds of fruits and nuts and pecans. And I got to tell you, she is yeah, she inspired that. She was a foodie before that word was ever used. She would just be laughing right now at the idea of somebody calling her a foodie. She was just into fresh. In the house, there's a cupboard near the fireplace in which she had all of her stored fruits and vegetables. In fact, she had a jar in which she put peas and carrots and tomatoes and green beans and all of that ready, and then she would just take either pork or beef, and then she'd have a stock, and then pour that vegetable in it, and we would have a soup. And in the middle of the winter, we would have this fresh food, and we grew up with like that. My dad, my uncle, he was laughing one time. He said, "Yeah, we spent like all of these years eating pork, and I guess that was bad for us." But he says, there's something about it all came from the farm. It was all fresh, and it was all great, and it was with fresh vegetables. And what a life! What a life they lived. And all we're trying to do is really replicate some pieces of that. Yeah, she was a foodie. She was a big time foodie, and we talked food all the time. We lived from meal to meal. It was what were we going to do in between the meals, and what did we have to do to go prepare for the meals. And one of the things I remember is my grandmother basically saying, "Herman Jr." She called me Herman Jr. Go out to the garden and get a watermelon before it gets hot. We'll put it on the steps, and we'll cut it after dinner. And I remember being so small and walking out this magical garden and basically looking for a watermelon and pulling it and bringing it back and putting it on the steps, and we eat. And I remember they'd cut it with a knife, and I was like, wow, they, that's grown behind the house. The peas were grown behind the house. She made the corn. We had cornbread, and we would eat. You know, we were vegetarians even for some meals when nobody knew what a vegetarian was, because we didn't eat meat all the time. Sometimes we just have vegetables, and that was wonderful because it was just so fresh, and I have incredible memories of that.
I know you've talked about her connection to the land, and one of the things I think is interesting is you spent the last few years learning the family history, and it's somewhere along the way, whether it was in your writing or whether it was something you said, you talked about how you didn't learn the family history and know the family history growing up. What you knew was Arveda's philosophy on life, which was about family, and it was about land, and it was about
My
doing.
my grandmother talked incessantly. I She was a talker. She never stopped. It went on and on and on. You know, funny thing is, I went into a career in sales, which I don't know if a lot of people know this, but a career in sales is more about your ability to listen than your ability to talk. And I grew up listening to her talk. She, because everything she said to me was just fascinating. There was nothing boring about anything. She would go into the most minute details and tell me about her life, about growing up as a child. She would tell me about people and her take on them. She had the most generous soul, but she would not suffer a fool. She hewed to a standard that a guy who works here at the ranch, he basically said there were 3 or 4 women in the community who basically were perceived as being, resolute. I don't know if he used that word, but just absolutely steadfast in what they believed in. And that was her. And she would impart those lessons to me. She felt that there was a sense of urgency for her to make sure I understood how life was put together. And then she would use the experiences from her life. She had regrets. She didn't have very much education, to third, fourth grade, before she basically had to come home and take care of her siblings. But she never used it as an excuse to uh, to make progress in life. And she transferred that to her sons, and she transferred that to me. She wasted no time in basically making sure that I understood that I had a job to do. I had a legacy to carry on. And I was so thrilled with her. In fact, I'll never forget is that when I met Deborah, who became my wife, I brought her very quickly to the ranch. And my grandmother just was like, yes. It was like, okay, I can marry this girl. It says she saw the essence of us, and that we would be good for each other, and that we would carry on this legacy. That for her. And in fact, I didn't think about it much back then, but she never traveled. And she stayed at the ranch towards the end of her life. She never left this place. But did you know that we got married in Oklahoma City in the middle of a snowstorm? And guess who was there? Arvetta. She had to see this. It didn't matter what it required or how much it took out of her. She was gonna come to this wedding, and that spirit we took with us on our journey when we got married. Uh, that's that was the nature of the person. She would, this ranch this property, this house, which we restored about 5 years ago, is just really a reflection of her spirit, and I'm better for it.
When